back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
And welcome back to Just Energy Radio. Thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. You can listen to Just Energy Radio live here on the Inception Radio Network. And in 2 weeks, starting on January 3rd, Thursday, January 3rd, Just Energy Radio will be moving to Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're very excited about this transition. Okay, a little nervous, but excited. But in 2 weeks, you know, if I had some Jeopardy music, I would play that for you right now. But in 2 weeks, it's going to be December 21st, 2012. And we decided, just in case the world doesn't come to an end and we're like all hanging out here still, we're going to be airing our regularly scheduled Friday show with our topic of what were you doing while the world was coming to an end? And so we're opening up the phone lines and taking your calls about your stories of survival, or do you feel the world is actually transcending, or what do you think was going on? Why did we get into so much fear about this whole concept of the Mayan calendar in 2012? But we really are looking to laugh and have a good time because we're going to be able to breathe, because we're moving past this period, which I feel has been going on for the last 2 years of fear. So please do join me and my special guest, John Michael Greer. He's a hoot. We're going to have a lot of fun. So, you know, make some popcorn and hang out with us. December 21st from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please do go to the Just Energy Radio webpage, sign up for our weekly newsletter to keep you informed of all of our excellent programming like you're hearing today. And one last announcement, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where if you're interested in becoming a medical intuitive counselor, or energy medicine practitioner, this is a course that you can take from the comfort of your own home. That's appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. So in this hour, we're going to be speaking to Robert Feather and getting some new insights into the Dead Sea Scrolls. But let me tell you a little bit about Robert and get him on the air. Robert Feather is a trained metallurgist and technical engineering writer of 25 years standing. His work on Jewish and Middle Eastern history and the Dead Sea Scrolls resulted in his book, The Copper Scroll Decoded, which showed the undeniable link between the Dead Sea community responsible for the scrolls and the religion of dynastic Egypt. Yet some years ago, he embarked on new research into the true history of one of the world's most enigmatic religious artifacts, the Spear of Destiny, or Spear of Christ, housed in the Hofsburg Museum, Vienna. All right, but we're not talking about the Spear of Destiny. Today, we're talking about Dead Sea Scrolls. But anyway, the author of the book, Black Holes in the Dead Sea Scrolls, I love that title, Black Holes in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Robert Feather. Hi, Robert. How are you?
Hello, Dr. Rita. I'm very, very well and very pleased to speak to you after 3 years since we last spoke.
I know. See, I'm kind of embarrassed because I love your work, because I feel like you are just such a consummate researcher and bring so much new information to the forefront, or old information that no one's heard about in a really long time, to the forefront, that I'm kind of embarrassed. Well, you need to email me more, I guess.
I should. I mean, I've been very, very busy in the meantime. I've produced 3 new books and 3 television documentaries. The new books are the one you just mentioned, Black Holes in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Well, what are the other ones?
The other one's The Clash of Steel, which is my first venture into fiction, actually, which is about the spear that was thrust into the side of Jesus. And it's a kind of an adventure thriller story based on my work on actually examining the spear when it was in the Hofsburg Museum in Vienna. And then I also did a biography of Joseph Milik, who was the doyen of the Dead Sea Scrolls translators. The documentaries have been another one on the legend of the Holy Spear for National Geographic in 2010, and then I did another on Hitler and the Spear of Destiny And very recently I did one on the lead codices for BBC One, but that's another story.
And see, I haven't seen either of those on TV because I would naturally watch those. And then I would go, I know that guy, which I do all the time. It's like, wait, I know that guy.
Well,
so,
I mean, sorry, yes.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, the National Geographic ones would have been available in America, but the other ones were a channel called Yesterday, which is a Sky channel, and BBC One, which I suppose still was iPodable. But anyway, I'm having fun and relishing my research and now wondering about what do I do next.
More research. I know how that is. You get done with the research and then it's like, you take a couple weeks off and it's like, well, wait a minute, what about this? And you start the new quest.
I've got to gear myself up for it because I know there's enormous amount of time involved and once you get started, it's like a treadmill. You're on it.
I hear you, brother. I hear you.
You've experienced it, yes.
Well, I mean, I just released a new book called Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods, and I've been on this 3-year quest through mythology from around the world and putting it together, and it's so exciting, but, you know, it's kind of like a Lay's potato chip. You just can't eat one. I mean, you just kind of get going and don't want to put it down until you're done.
It pulls you in, doesn't it? I noticed you've published a book on Kabbalah, which...
Actually, it's a CD. It's a meditation CD.
Okay. We must talk about that at some stage, because that's an area I've got into, partly through these lead books, the Jordan Codices, some of which are genuine and some which aren't. A lot of them aren't. Anyway.
Okay. But... See, and I don't even know anything about these lead books, so I put a little note down that we should spend a couple of minutes talking about it. But let's go over to your book, Black Holes of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And perhaps the best place to start would be to just do a very brief review of what the Dead Sea Scrolls are, who wrote them, who placed them in the caves. Just a very brief, make sure everybody's on the same page here.
Okay. They're generally defined as all the material that came out of one of 11 caves that border the Dead Sea behind the settlement of Qumran. Well, it's ruins now, but sometime between 130, 140 BC to 68 AD, a very devout religious community lived there. They wrote some of the material. They collected it, and they obviously brought some with them because a lot of it has been carbon dated to 3rd, 4th century BC, long before they came. What they were writing about and copying falls into 3 main categories. Biblical text, that's text from almost every book of the Bible, except Esther. Then their own sectarian texts which describe their beliefs, their activities, what they were doing, their social habits. They were celibate, so in this particular community it was male only. And then there are pseudepigraphic and apocryphal texts, some of which we'd never heard of before. New psalms, new material that no one had ever knew existed. But the significance of all those 3 groups is enormous. They all have profound effects on previous understanding of religious texts, religion itself, and history as well.
And in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are a number of texts that refer to characters such as the teacher of righteousness or the wicked priest that, from my understanding, they have defied identification, and it just sounds like, because I've read a couple of the different Dead Sea Scrolls, but it just seems like some of it just doesn't make sense or seems out of place when viewed from a Judaic perspective. Do you have any thoughts on why we haven't made, more progress into decoding what these texts are actually talking about?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, it's a real conundrum. I mean, it's really what got me started on this third book, the black holes, the unknown things in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the sobriquets for people mentioned in the sectarian, mainly the sectarian scrolls written by the community themselves, or particularly pertinent to their own beliefs. No one has any answers to who these people are, and that's what made me wonder. Well, why not? And that was the motivation for doing this. And the more I looked at it, the more I found, well, they finished all the official translations of the Dead Sea Scroll material. They're all available in Discoveries in the Dead Sea Scroll, in the Judean Desert series, about 44 volumes. Mammoth publications, and the last one has now been produced, and the editor-in-chief has said, I've finished my job now. I'm going to retire, and that's it. I've done. It's all done, all finished. Everything's fine. But that's so far from the reality of the situation. The translations have been done, but they don't understand most of the content of the material. And the people that you mentioned, if you ask a Dead Sea Scrolls scholar, who was the teacher of righteousness, who was the wicked priest, who was the plant of righteousness, they don't give you an answer. You'll get dozens of answers from different people, and some people will just say, we just don't know. And I went to speak to the really the most respected and well-known Dead Sea Scrolls scholar in Britain, Professor Geza Vermesh. He's emeritus professor at Oxford University. And he's written extensively on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he has a particular interest in Jesus' relationship to them. And I asked him very many times, who are these people mentioned in the scrolls? And unlike a lot of other scholars who try and make something up and waffle about, really flounder about, I would say, and come up with quite unbelievable explanations, he said, well, we just don't know. He said, we just don't know. We don't know. We're not sure. Who were the three messiahs? We don't know. They were waiting for three messiahs, and they described them: a kingly messiah, a priestly messiah, and one sounds like Moses, but it's not sure. And Geza Vermesh was extremely frank in saying, we don't know. These are blanks. And when you look at the literature and the discussions that are going on, people are ignoring these basic fundamental questions. And the reasons why some of the scrolls clearly talk about a city and a temple that is not Jerusalem. And that's not just in the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves. And the Bible in Ezekiel and Isaiah talk about the same kind of thing that people do not understand. So they confine it to imagination, fantasy, whereas it can't be fantasy because it's just too detailed and too factual.
Okay, so explain to me, how could they be talking about a temple that's not in Jerusalem? I thought these texts were Jewish texts, and if they're going to talk about a temple, they would be talking about, like, the first temple, Solomon's temple. That would only make sense to me.
Well, that's what you'd expect. But as a community, and there was about 200 of them living at any one time around the site of Qumran. They lived in caves and in tents. They didn't actually live in the buildings. That's where they did their work, studied and copied the scrolls. They didn't go to the temple in Jerusalem. It was a no-go area for them. They didn't think it was correctly designed. It didn't have the right number of courts. It only had 2. They wanted 3, and the dimensions and the rituals weren't what they said should be going on. And what should be going on, in their view, is described in the Temple Scroll, which is it is the longest scroll. It's about 28 foot long, ever discovered, that Yadin translated and produced a very, very comprehensive translation very quickly. By the way, that's another area that, the black holes falls into three categories. The prevarications about getting the material out to the general public, the unknown quantities, these questions that no one seems to have a consensus answer, and the third sort of section, which is revealing an unsung hero of the Dead Sea Scrolls, who actually put money in or facilitated money going in to free up the translations. But the central theme is demonstrating what I postulated in the previous two books, The Mystery of the Copper Scroll of Qumran and The Secret Initiation of Jesus at Qumran, that there was a direct connection to these people, these Qumran Essenes, the Qumranites, whatever you like to call them, back to Pharaoh Akhenaten of the 14th century BC. And the new evidence, hard new evidence that I've found, in addition to previous really strong material, adds almost, I would say, certainty to what I'm talking about. But
it seems like the Jews over, I want to say the centuries, the millennia, have had an ongoing relationship with Egypt. Some good, some not so good.
They have, and you'd think people would look to Egypt for some of the answers, but certainly Israeli scholars and theologians, Christian theologians, don't look to Egypt. It's almost a no-go area for them. Egypt is considered to be a pagan country with idols all over the place in the earlier biblical period. Of course, that's not true. As we know, there was a window of monotheism, a pure monotheism, for 17 years, when Pharaoh Akhenaten went around smashing all the idols and instigating belief in one all-powerful, omnipotent, invisible God who he called Aten. He called him Aten. And the T in Egyptian hieroglyphics is interchangeable with D, so you can very easily read it as Adon, and Adon is the Hebrew name for God, Adonai. My theories have met a lot of resistance from Dead Sea Scroll scholars and biblical scholars, particularly in the sort of professional field, academic field, where I can understand for them, and I'm sure you hear this a lot of times, people bleating that because they're not a professional academic, they're not taken seriously. I'm kind of saying the same thing, but it's palpable that they not only aren't prepared to debate with me about it very much. Some of them do, but most of them are just too frightened, frankly, because what I'm saying contradicts their life's work and it puts them in jeopardy. That isn't to say that their own house is in order. It isn't. It's chaos, absolute chaos in the world of Dead Sea Scroll scholarship. You've got a situation where one high-profile professor in Chicago, Professor Norman Gold, has been pushing the idea that Qumran was a military fortress. That's just one of dozens of, frankly, impossible theories about what was going on at Qumran. And his son was arrested for masquerading on the internet and trying to support his father. It's almost farcical. I say chaos in the glass house of Dead Sea Scrolls academia. There are it seems like in that whole community, and I don't just mean Dead Sea scholars, but people that look at the Bible, or even mythology, it's like their goal is to prove the veracity of the Bible and biblical texts, and anything that comes out of that community all has to support that one book and that one narrative, and anything that falls out of it, is still considered heretical. Well, yes, I think they're quite frightened about the sort of status quo being disrupted, and it is being disrupted. having said that, I meet resistance. I meet a much more support. An increasing number of people are backing my theories. I mean, I wasn't the first to postulate that there was a connection back to Akhenaten. Sigmund Freud in the 1950s wrote a book called Moses and Monotheism. And more recently, we've got people like Roger and Mesud Saba and Professor Harold Ellens of Michigan University and Joseph Davidich, Eric Hornung, Jan Jasman, Sarah Israelit Groll, and Gerard Franks. We'll get to him. Sarah Israelit Groll, I think I'd like to talk a bit more about her work because it's so absolutely critical to what I'm doing and so pertinent that it's worth spending a few minutes about her input into what I've been saying.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Unfortunately, she's died. I wish I'd had a chance to meet her. She was at Hebrew University. But she specialized in Egyptian aspects of the Bible. And she looked at Isaiah 18, chapter 18, verse 19. And what she came up with is quite incredible. She says that when Isaiah is talking about 5 cities in Egypt in this biblical section, one of the cities is referred to in the Bible as a city of destruction. And he also, this is Isaiah, he talks about, blessed be Egypt, my people, and Syria and Israel, mine inheritance. Israel is further down the line of God's blessings. Egypt is first. And he says things like, those who strayed from God in Egypt must turn back to God. There's only one period in Egyptian history when Egypt followed a monotheistic one God scenario, and that was the period of Pharaoh Akhenaten. Isaiah knew about Amarna, or present-day Amarna, the place of Akhenaten's capital city, and it was called Akhetaten at that time. He knew about it, and in referring to the city of destruction, he uses a very unusual Hebrew format for the word for the city of destruction. He doesn't use the word shemesh, which is the normal word for sun. He uses haros, which can mean sun and destruction, and he's very cleverly put those in as a sort of a pointer, saying it's not just a city of destruction, it was the city of light, the city of sun. And Sarah Israelit Groll, in her analysis, says that Isaiah maintained and knew about Akhenaten, knew about that place, that religion, as the center and origin of Judaism. And that name of Akhenaten was known all the way down to the time of the Essenes. A lot of scholars have kind of dismissed what I say and said, well, Akhenaten just disappeared from history. No one knew anything about it. If they read Sarah Israelit Groll, they'll have to change their mind because she clearly sets out the case as to why his name remained hidden but extant, and that he was the source, together with, I think, Joseph and Jacob in the 14th century BC of monotheism.
Well, I mean, timeline-wise, are the Jews in Egypt at the same time that Akhenaten was ruling?
Yes. Joseph is the vizier. The story in the Bible, I think, is essentially correct. I mean, you have to be very careful with the details, but everything is consistent. The names of the period are actually relevant and the kind of names that would have been used in that period. The actual timing of the events fit very well with the biblical scenario that I date Abraham and Jacob and then Joseph, his son. And you can't get away from the proof in the Temple Scroll and the New Jerusalem Scroll But the people at Qumran knew the details of this city, knew about it, and they knew exactly what was going on there, or at least much more than the Bible said. The Bible knew what was going on, but it's hidden away in the text. And Joseph was clearly in charge of the granaries. We had this prediction there would be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And so he built storehouses for Pharaoh. Now this is another piece of hard evidence that I detail in the Black Holes in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The storehouses are described in the Temple Scroll as having 52 separate segments in them. And if you look at the outline plan of the city of Akhenaten, you can see them designated, long buildings. And I've been to Amman and I've seen the excavations, the remains of these storehouses, and they run along the side of the Great Temple. This Great Temple is about a half a mile long. It's huge. And its dimensions are given in the Temple Scroll, and they cannot possibly fit on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It's just too big. It's too large. These storehouses are described in the Temple Scroll, in column 44 of the Temple Scroll, as having 52 cells. When we look at the archaeological excavations in Egypt of the holy city of Akhenaten, there are 52 separate segments in the building, which is designated as a granary, a grain store. That's no coincidence. The Temple Scroll knew about details at Amarna of the storage facilities that Joseph built for Pharaoh.
Well, one of the comments that you had in the book was when talking about when Akhenaten was dethroned. That's a nice way of saying it.
Yes.
Was taken out of power, that the Jews became, and I think this is the words you used, personas non grata.
Yes.
Which I thought it was just a very interesting way of looking at it, because then it makes a lot more sense why, they went into Egypt and they were accepted, and what changed. There wasn't ever anything that tied into what changed their position in society.
Well, what changed their position in society, which was recorded in the Bible. Akhenaten is probably killed and disappears from the scene, and the Hebrews, who he'd supported, are no longer able to remain safe. And the story about them being disenfranchised is explained by that. There's a rupture in the continuity. The old pagan priests get back into power, and the Hebrews, who are believing in one God, just as Akhenaten did, are out of favor with the new pharaoh. The new pharaoh probably being Ai, who probably had Akhenaten killed. And then we get a succession of Tutankhamun comes next after a sort of transitory pharaoh called Smenkhara. Then comes Tutankhamun, who is really a puppet for Ai, who is probably killed also by Ai. Interestingly, when I'm looking again at the work that's been going on in and around Amarna, one of the anchors is that the early followers of Jesus came to Amarna, came to look at this holy city, which was probably completely desolate at that stage. Why they would come there, no one has any explanation, unless you take on board the theories that I'm postulating, that Christ and John the Baptist were members of the Qumran community. Therefore, they knew what the Qumran knew about Amarna, and they wanted to go back to their roots. And they did. And they actually established a place of worship in one of the tombs in the hills running along the back of what is now Amarna by the Nile. They established a place of worship. They carved out a baptismal font, but they later developed it into a fully fledged church. But initially it was nothing like a church. There was no crosses, no crucifix, no images of Jesus. The only image of Jesus is one they drew next to Pharaoh Akhenaten and his queen Nefertiti, with Nefertiti holding Jesus as a child. And they put in red ink, they put across the image, the relief of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, the Chi Rho, which is the early sign for Christianity. They didn't deface these images of, in fact, more than that, they worshipped in front of a relief of Akhenaten driving his holy chariot, glistening, bejeweled, golden, encrusted chariot, which is pictured on the wall of this tomb, a huge cavernous tomb, and it's still very much intact to this day. And that's where all the origins of the chariot legends appear, which are obviously quite relevant to Kabbalah and imagery throughout the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. So the Christians early followers of Jesus, I don't think you can call them Christians yet, go to Amarna because they know that was the place of their roots. The work going on there has revealed a figure that looks like a saint. He's got a golden sort of orb above his head and the robes that he's wearing. And the robes that he's wearing are consistent with Roman secular costume of about 50 to 60 AD. So not long after the crucifixion of Jesus, early followers of Jesus are traveling to Egypt and to Amarna.
That's interesting because they knew something that other people didn't know. But I mean, even at the same time, we had, the biblical story of Mary and Joseph taking off and spending time in Egypt. And I forget why they ended up going there, but that was, pretty because early in the narrative as well.
They were warned that Herod was going to come round and kill the firstborn.
Well, that's right.
and incidentally, that's interesting because this relief that I described in the tomb of Penhazi at Amarna has, especially as we're running up to Christmas, underneath the picture of Pharaoh Akhenaten as King Akhenaten and his queen is a line of three wise-looking men bowing to the couple with the child Jesus in their arm. I think that's possibly the origin of the legend of the three wise men coming to worship at the nativity of Jesus. It's all there, just waiting to be looked at. And Egyptian scholars, people like Alan Schulman, James Hofmeyer and Kenneth Kitchen, know much more about Egypt than Israeli scholars. And they are very much tuned into the idea of Joseph and the Hebrews being in Egypt prior to Moses. And their reception to my ideas, their work backs up my work far, far more than any of the, what can I say, Dead Sea Scroll academics who are still busy trying to work out whether a little vowel changes or a line is vertical or horizontal and changes the translation of a word, which when they finally agreed the translation, they still don't know what it means.
Well, I mean, I can understand that, they're being a little OC about, the actual just translation and not really looking at the interpretation. And, somebody has to do it. Not me, not you, but somebody has to do that. But one of the things that I found fascinating was your discussion about the description of the temple scrolls. And I'm hoping you can kind of share that, where you found huge discrepancies between what you read in the scrolls versus what was actually built, either for the first temple, Solomon's temple, or the second temple, and some of the activities that you found going on there, the discrepancies with the sacrificing, whatever. Can you address that? Because I was pretty blown away by it. I thought it was like,
Well, there are descriptions which there are just no reasonable explanations as to where they got their information from. And they had a detailed plan of how the temple scroll, how the temple should be built. And it's nothing like the one in Jerusalem. The altar that they describe in the temple scroll is in exact proportion to the size of the altar at Pharaoh Akhenaten's temple. We know that not just from excavations, but from the drawings of the temple on some of these tomb walls. There's a whole line of tombs with various officials of the court of Akhenaten. There must have been about 50 or 60,000 people there in a brand new, gleaming city that he built, which he surrounded with boundaries, so that if you were in the city, you were in a holy area. Outside, you were not. And we know from these drawings on these several dozen tombs what the inside of the temple looked like. And we can work out the plan of it. And the size of the temple, 600 cubit, 800 cubits long. So it's about 1,600 meters. It's 800 meters. It's huge. The examples of activities going on within the temple also defy explanation from conventional understanding of descriptions of the temple and the altar. They talk about crowning the high priest with 7 crowns in the temple scroll. Where does that come from? No one has tried to even address that particular conundrum. And yet we know that in Egypt there were 7 crowns that a pharaoh would wear. 7 different crowns for his areas of influence. It's taken out of Egyptian routines, and that's repeated time and time again. That kind of anomalous description, not present in the Bible, but present in Amarna, either inscriptions on tomb walls or information in the Amarna letters, which is dozens and dozens of letters that we have in various museums, and they describe activities as well. We also know from Talitat, which are building blocks, because Akhenaten was not just a religious genius, an innovator. He was an innovator in design and construction and art, and he designed a very rapid method of building using standard rectangular cube-like bricks. They have now been reassembled, and if you go to Luxor, the museum at Luxor in Egypt, southern Egypt, there's a whole wall showing scenes of life and activities at Amarna, and one of them is certainly a priest carrying what is almost certainly a Sefer Torah, a Torah through the temple at Amarna, identical almost to the kind of scroll that's paraded through synagogues to this very day.
My observation in reading the Old Testament, or at least the Torah portion, that's the part that I like the best. Even though I really have to read Ezekiel because it's like it sounds like it's really juicy. But it just sounds like, God that Moses interacted with was pretty OC in that you have to build this size, and it has to be this many cubits, and it has to have, this much gold on it. And my understanding was that when they were given the directions for building the temple, there were very specific measurements that they were supposed to follow that we find in the Bible. So it seems like it would be a fairly easy job to take, this is what the Bible says, and this is what this other text says, and, compare and contrast and go, they're not talking about the same thing.
No. I mean, I did a lot of work in my previous books on Ezekiel, particularly Ezekiel chapter 47, which describes the temple, which again is not the temple at Jerusalem. And Benzion Wacholder, unfortunately, who's passed away, a great professor at Cincinnati University, he identified Ezekiel as the first Qumranite, as the first Essene, because complicated to explain, but he said Ezekiel was writing material that was sectarian, just as the people at Qumran were. And now there's a link. I mean, he also, from there, you can identify what he's talking about right the way back to what was happening in Sinai, the giving of the Ten Commandments. By the way, my next book, I think I've probably decided on what I'm going to do. I've been absolutely cudgeling myself as to what do I do next. And I think I'll probably go and do a book on, or try and do a book on where Moses stood, because I'm pretty sure I know exactly where Moses received the Ten Commandments, the actual place. And it's not St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, which is the conventional place that Helena designated. Helena was Constantine's mother, and she went around saying, this is where the Ten Commandments were found, and this is where Jesus was buried, and this is a piece of the true cross, and so on. And St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai is the conventional place where the Ten Commandments were given. But I found another place which is so many, including a Hebrew inscription, high up on the wall of this high prominent place, where I'm almost sure Moses stood to deliver, or he probably threw them down. He's supposed to have thrown them down at one stage, the Ten Commandments. But that's sidetracking a bit. But
well, that sounds like it would be a good book, though.
I hope so. I think.
I mean, knowing you and your level of research, I already know it'll be good. And I think of all biblical characters, Moses is my favorite. He is absolutely my favorite. We did this thing in this class, and they said, if you could go and have dinner or drinks with anybody, who would it be? And my comment was Moses, because I would want to know. What was the Pharaoh?
Charlton Heston, you'd want to have dinner with?
Well, only if he was the real Moses, because there's so much juice that happens in Exodus with, laser beams coming from the sky and the splitting of the ocean and meeting God on the mountain. I mean, I would love to have a one-on-one. I'd love to have him on Just Energy Radio for an interview. How cool would that be?
Oh, that'd be incredible. I mean, not possible, of course, but we can get near to him by, a lot of people talk about him as being a fictitious person. I don't think, because we don't have very much detail about King Saul, King Solomon, King David and King Solomon. There's very little archaeological evidence for them, unfortunately. And people say, well, therefore, anything before that is all fiction. I don't believe that. We've got very firm evidence for the existence of Moses and for the existence of Jacob and Joseph. And there's an image of Joseph on one of these tomb walls at Amarna, and it's clearly him. He's got a bandage around his leg. He's a priest, and he's in the procession going up to worship the Aten, together with Akhenaten and Nefertiti. I've just picked up on something I meant to mention, and I'm probably sort of jogging back a bit. But in terms of early Christianity being aware of what was going on, and this transmission all the way down over a period of 1,000 years. And that's something people criticize, but they don't kind of specifically have any points to make. They just say they don't believe it. One of the links in the chain is, I believe, Abiathar. Abiathar was a priest under David, but when Solomon comes to power to build the first temple, Abiathar is no longer he's dismissed, and he's banished, in fact. But for some I link him as a direct Mosaic, one of the Zadok priestly line, the two priestly lines, at least two priestly lines, that can be traced right the way from the Levites at Amarna. And the Dead Sea Scrolls continually refer to Levites as priests in prior to Moses, prior to being any tabernacle in the desert, prior to being any temple. They talk about priests, Jacob, collecting tithes for a temple. I mean, there just isn't any temple as far as most people believe, but of course there must have been. Otherwise, what's he doing? Collecting things for the temple, wasting his time. The Levites are okay. They go underground when Akhenaten is dispossessed, and they retreat. They flee in all directions. Some of them end up at a place called Ab, an island of Ab, known as Elephantine, and the line continues down through Abiathar, who, as one of these Levitical priests, becomes disenfranchised under Solomon. But he retreats to Anatoth in southern Canaan, and there he establishes his retinue of believers, his followers, and they eventually translate themselves into the Qumran Essenes. And for some reason, the New Testament picks up Abiathar as an important person. Everyone else thinks, well, he's no longer important. But in Matthew 2, verse 26, Abiathar is cited as the high priest as the time of King David, as coming into the house of God and eating the bread of presence. The puzzle is that Mark has Jesus saying, haven't you ever read that David did when he was in need and he and his companions were hungry? How had he entered into the house of God when Abiathar was high priest and ate the sacred bread that is not lawful for anyone but priests to eat, and also gave it to his companions? And most theologians are completely stumped by this. Why is Jesus suddenly talking about Abiathar? Especially is not even understood to be the high priest during David's reign. But Jesus knew about the significance of Abiathar in carrying the line of Levitical belief from Amarna right the way down to the Yachad, to the community at Qumran. And as he was a member of that Yachad himself, he had intimate knowledge of the transmission of the secret holy knowledge about this God that Akhenaten believed in, and Jacob and Joseph helped establish the philosophy of.
I'm going to kind of shift topics here a little bit. If Judaism was based on Egyptian religion or religious tradition, and Judaism flourished in the Jerusalem area, then where did the Essenes come from, or how did this Egyptian sect, I don't know any other way to put it, end up in Qumran, which is so close to Jerusalem?
I think you have to go to your Ezekiel again to see. Ezekiel talks about walking. He's being conducted around a building, and it's clearly a huge building, and he's told to walk 1,000 cubits in a particular direction, and his ankles will be up. He'll be in water up to his ankles, and then walk another 1,000 cubits. Cubit being about 50 centimeters. So he's told to go about 500 yards, 500 meters, and he'll be in water. And each time he's told to walk a further 1,000 cubits, he's getting more and more into deep water. This has got to be the Nile that Ezekiel is talking about. And then Ezekiel talks about the waters, the refreshing waters, cleansing the barren sea near Ein Gedi. He actually gives the name of the place as Ein Gedi. That's where he says that the refreshing waters, these holy waters that have flowed obviously from the Nile into the temple, the great temple at the Akhenaten's temple by the Nile in Middle Egypt. These waters are then flowing through, figuratively, to Ein Gedi. Now, Ein Gedi is only a few kilometers from Qumran. I think they took Ezekiel's directions as to where they should establish their community. Now, where they came from and how they were this line of Levitical priests who had to keep undercover because they were out of office. The Aaronic priests were in power, and it was only later when they had a chance in the Hasmonean period to reestablish their lineage, their rights, and the person who leads them, the teacher of righteousness, Onias IV, is the person next in line, as it were, in this succession who brings them down to Qumran. Before he does that, he's banished, he's disenfranchised from the temple as high priest, and because of his beliefs, which are contrary to everybody else. He believes in a solar calendar and a different set of beliefs, which eventually come down to Qumran, and he is banished, and he goes off to build a temple, amazingly, at a place called Leontopolis, near Cairo, and he builds a temple very, very reminiscent of the shape of the temple at Akhenaten, Akhenaten's holy city. And instead of putting the menorah, the traditional lamp standard, as the main decoration or ornamentation, he has a huge, great golden globe, which I believe is his representation of the Aten, the sun globe that God was kind of imagined not to be, but as a kind of representation, a reminder of God's sort of light, really. And then from there he comes back. He comes back to Canaan and establishes the Qumran community around about 130, 140 BC. So he is the teacher of righteousness, the plant of righteousness that no one has a clue who he is. He is Akhenaten. He is the original plant of righteousness that all these people that are mentioned by name, or title, not name, by title, are unknown. These are the people that I kept on asking Professor Geza Vermesh, and he was very patient with me, and he smiled and sort of kind of almost patted me on the head and said, "Well, dear boy, we don't know that. Why are you asking these awkward questions?" But these are the answers to those questions. The wicked priest was a contemporary of Onias IV, Menelaus, and we know a lot about them. And the weird thing is that biblical and Dead Sea Scrolls scholars have extremely detailed descriptions of these characters, but they don't seem prepared to actually identify them and give them a name, whereas I do in Black Holes in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I think I solve a lot of conundrums. One of the other areas that we haven't talked about much, or we have, is the sort of disarray in the house of Dead Sea Scrolls scholarship.
Well, and just to let you know, we only have I can't believe this, 2 minutes left.
Well, okay. Very quickly, I by chance met up with someone who was the person who freed up the scrolls by pumping money into the official translation team through Yarnton at Oxford. His name is John Franks, and he worked for the Wolfson Foundation. And he's never been publicly acknowledge the work he did in bringing money to the team so that the tasks could be completed. And Emmanuel Todd, the editor-in-chief, could not have completed the task he did without the work of John Franks. He was instrumental in freeing up the publication of the scrolls, and he deserves a lot more recognition than he's had. He's a very modest man, and it was pure chance that I stumbled across him. But if you look in the volumes of discoveries in the Judean desert, there are acknowledgements of people who contributed, and there's always an anonymous contributor. And this is the person who brought in money from the Wolfson Foundation to actually facilitate the publication of the Dead Sea Scroll material.
Great. And so if somebody wants to get your book, Black Holes in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where is it available?
Oh, it's on all the Amazon sites. It's on Kindle as well. So, it's quite expensive. It came out in hardback from publishers in England. But they put Watkins Publishing, but they put it on Kindle, which is a little bit more modestly priced. So you get all the illustrations and you get all the text. I think it will probably go into paperback in due course, but the hardback version is readily available from most good. Well, I always say that, don't they? Good bookshops, but Amazon and other sites. It's on my website as well, which is robert-feather.com. So if anyone can't get hold of it for some reason or wants a signed copy, they can contact me on my website, and I'd be happy to supply one.
And I bet it'll be signed too. Woo-hoo.
Yes.
All right. Well, Robert, there's the music, which means we have to wrap it for today. But thanks so much for coming on. And when you have your next project come out, send me an email. We'll have you back on. Promise?
Love to do that.
Okay.
Dr.
All right.
Thank you very much indeed. I hope we meet one day, because we've talked and I can see your image on my screen, and you're pretty attractive.
Okay, well, I'm not going to touch that right now on air. Okay, that's Robert Feather. His webpage is robert-feather.com. The book is Black Holes in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And next week, we are going to have Tobias Curtin on, talking about the mysteries of John the Baptist, and Gene Manning talking about new free energy. And so until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio.